One of the greatest players in the history of professional football wants to come to New York. Aaron Rodgers has finally announced his plans for 2023, and he wants to be a member of the New York Jets. We'll discuss it today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, this is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making this show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help the channel out and help other Jets fans find the podcast. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and then bonus episodes as needed. The big news finally came on Wednesday afternoon. We've been waiting for it. We've been waiting weeks. We've been waiting months. On Pat McAfee's show, Aaron Rodgers, the legendary quarterback, the future Hall of Famer, announced that he intends to play the 2023 season for the New York Jets. And there's so much to discuss about this. There's so much to talk about. It's like a lightning bolt through the fan base. And even somebody like me who, has been telling you over the last couple of weeks and couple of months on the show that I'm a little skeptical of a trade for Rodgers. I mean, you got to be excited. How can you, I understand that there are some concerns about this trade. I have them myself. I get that. But if you cannot get excited about the idea of a future Hall of Fame quarterback, one of the greatest players in the history of the sport, coming to New York, wanting to come to New York and play for the Jets, it's amazing. Now, probably nobody has more egg on his face at this point of the offseason than me, because pretty much everything I predicted about this whole Rodgers situation was wrong. I dismissed the idea at the very beginning of the offseason. I criticized the Jets. I probably mocked the Jets for hiring Nathaniel Hackett because I felt like the theory behind it was that Jets thought Hackett was going to help recruit Rodgers. I kind of dismissed that. And of course, if you saw the Pat McAfee interview, Rodgers told you the exact opposite. Rodgers told you that I was completely wrong on that. So a lot of humble pie I need to eat as we approach what presumably will be a trade for Aaron Rodgers. Now, how does this impact the New York Jets in 2023? Well, I think you have to think that it's very, very likely, if Rodgers stays healthy, that the playoff drought ends. Now, I think there's an open question: how much does Rodgers still have in the tank? He clearly is coming off the worst season of his career, and there are some potentially mitigating factors to that. He played much of the season with a thumb injury, a pretty serious thumb injury. Tough to hold the football with the thumb injury. We also know that Rodgers' receiving core was not great. They lost Devontae Adams. I know they added Christian Watson, but it was not a great group Rodgers was playing with. He did seem to get better as the year went along, but even if Rodgers gives you what he gave you in 2022, let's say he's the same quarterback in 2023 as he was in 22, the Jets are probably a playoff team. He will lift this offense, because you have to remember how big of an upgrade he'd be. The Jets had the worst quarterback play in the NFL last year. And if it wasn't the worst, then it was pretty close to it. It was at the absolute bottom. So Rodgers, who last year, even in a diminished state, was an above-average quarterback, lifts the Jets' offense, because you're also getting back Breece Hall, who's going to help the run game a lot. Rodgers also gives you what I'd call defensive regression insurance, because the Jets had an excellent defense last year. In fact, I think if anything, the Jets' defense is a little bit underrated. I think he's a little underappreciated, because the team lost, of course, 6 straight games to end the season. And I think when you have a losing streak like that and, you end the season poorly, everybody gets some of the blame. And the defense did deserve some of the blame. They had some rough games near the end, especially the Thursday night game with Jacksonville, the game against Detroit where they did not get the big stop, the disaster in Seattle week 17 that officially eliminated them. But over the course of the season, every defense is going to have bad games. The Jets' defense was excellent. There's questions, though. Can they maintain that pace? Part of that will be determined by what they do in the offseason. They got some work to do up front at defensive tackle. They've got some other spots to build up on this defense. They got some salary cap questions they need to answer. Will certain players stay? Will certain players go? It's also a question of injury luck. Will the Jets have good injury luck on the defensive side of the ball? And you can't ignore the fact that they played 5 backup quarterbacks last year, which certainly helped things. So all these factors come into play. And sometimes a unit regresses after a big season. Now, if this unit regresses, the Jets would be better able to absorb it because the offense is going to be lifted up. The big question I have with Rodgers, though, is how much does he have left in the tank? I gave you the scenario where maybe he's in a diminished state. One of the things that I have a question about with Rodgers is how motivated will he be? Because you look at the guys who've played really well at the quarterback position in their late 30s into their 40s, they tend to be very motivated guys. I think back to the Brett Favre season with the Jets in 2008. He was not really that motivated. He really did not want to be with the Jets. He had retired. He actually retired a few months earlier, and that's actually what led to the trade to New York, because Favre retired, so the Packers said we're moving forward with Rodgers. Then Favre unretired, and the Packers had to find a spot for him. So Favre came in. He really had not, he did not really get himself into shape, and now he suffered an injury. But it was much more of an up and down season than people remember. Then you compare it to guys like Tom Brady, who just keeps himself in top shape. With Rodgers, I think there's a question. He's accomplished so much. Is he motivated? And if you saw that interview, one of the things that struck me is it seems like he might be on the verge of one of those all-show you seasons. He's angry with the Green Bay Packers. He does not think he was treated right. And we can debate the merits of whether or not Rodgers was treated right by the Green Bay Packers. But if you get Rodgers, you want a guy who's breathing fire, a guy with something to prove, a guy who wants to show his old team that he still has something left in the tank. And very circumstantial evidence. I never want to read too much into an interview, but he gave you the impression that maybe he's fired up. Maybe the Packers deciding to move on from him has lit a little bit of a fire in him. And if you get like a motivated Rodgers who comes in top shape, that could change everything. It's tough to win a Super Bowl. You need a lot to go your way. But a quarterback like Rodgers raises your opportunity more than practically anything else in the NFL. And it's going to be a short-term deal. It's going to be a 1 to 2 year deal likely with Aaron Rodgers. He's not going to be a guy who's here for the long haul. But you get a couple breaks. Maybe Buffalo takes a step back next year. And of course this could come into play with if they lose some guys during the offseason. Maybe some team suffers some injury. Maybe you get some scheduling luck. Suddenly, if the bounces go your way, you go from being a playoff team to a team that could potentially make a run. And the Jets, for the first time in a while, have a core of really good young talent. And could Rodgers be that missing piece? It's no guarantee. It's risky. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and tell you there's no risk. I think any trade for Aaron Rodgers is probably high risk, high reward. But the reward level is quite high. I think anybody would tell you that. I think the biggest skeptic of this trade in the world would tell you that there's a real boom scenario for the Jets. It could happen. And would I put the Jets ahead of Kansas City right now? No. Would I put them ahead of Cincinnati right now? No. Would I put them ahead of Buffalo? No. With Rodgers, and they still have to make the trade, so I don't want to count my chickens before they hatched. I think the Jets are probably in that second tier in the AFC. I think they're probably in that tier with teams like the Chargers, teams like the Ravens, teams like the Jaguars, in that second tier. But you get a few bounces your way, maybe you get up to that first tier. And maybe you can finally break this drought. Because, I've been thinking recently, when I was a kid, the New York Rangers, the hockey team, had a 54-year championship drought. And that was viewed as like this unbelievable thing, this unbelievable curse. Jets are right there. It's been a really long time since we've had a chance to celebrate a Super Bowl. And it was another Hall of Fame quarterback who brought the Jets to the promised land. Aaron Rodgers. Can he be that guy? Can he be the guy who finally delivers the Jets their first championship after more than 5 decades? Well, I got to tell you, even if you understand some of the drawbacks of this trade, I think you got to be excited at the thought of this, because Aaron Rodgers brings that level of excitement that we've been lacking for a long time. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue our discussion about Aaron Rodgers potentially coming to the New York Jets. We'll talk about what it means to the franchise, because I think it means more than just what happens in the 2023 season. I think Rodgers wanting to come to the Jets speaks volumes about the direction the franchise is moving in, and we'll discuss that as we continue here on this episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The Jets and Packers still need to complete a trade. I would not even try and venture a guess as to when that will be. I certainly would not put money down on it. But the NBA playoffs are approaching, and that makes it the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and even threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even let you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And if you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast. We have new episodes each day, Monday through Friday, and then bonus episodes as needed. The big story, of course, is Aaron Rodgers declaring that he wants to come to the New York Jets. There are still some details to be worked out. The Packers in the past have indicated that they will accommodate Rodgers whatever he wants to do. It sounds like the Packers are kind of finished with him. So now Rodgers is looking to come to New York. Kind of follow in the footsteps of Brett Favre, the last legendary Packers quarterback, who of course did not end his career with the Jets, but had a one-year stop with the Jets back in 2008. You know, it's funny because this interview he did with Pat McAfee on Wednesday, like I said, it was like a bolt of lightning through the fan base. You could tell everybody was excited about it. It seemed like huge news. And then I took a step back like after the interview and I said, doesn't really seem like that much has changed. I mean, we learned something that we already knew. You kind of knew that Trey Wingo, the former ESPN reporter, had indicated over the last couple of days that Rodgers was coming to New York, and Wingo seemed to have an in with Aaron Rodgers. The Jets and Packers still had not completed a trade. We knew Rodgers was likely coming here because the Jets had already agreed to terms with Allen Lazard on Tuesday. So, you really did not learn a whole lot from this. It's kind of amazing because it felt like this monumental event as it was happening, but looking at it, there's still a lot to do. And I don't know that a whole lot has changed, but I do think one minor thing has changed. I think in the back of my mind, and maybe in the back of your mind, there was this thought, is Rodgers just messing with the Jets? Because we know, he's a unique personality, let's put it that way. And I don't think you could rule out the idea that he was just kind of messing around and he was trying to mess with the Green Bay Packers, their offseason, and maybe the Jets were going to be collateral damage in that. So I do think the one real takeaway is that Rodgers seems like he genuinely wants to come to the New York Jets. And I can't stop but think about what that means for the franchise. Because if you've been a Jets fan, I mean, it's been a rough 12 years. This has been a team that's been at the bottom of the league. The only time they even came close to the playoffs in those 12 years was 2015 when they lost to the Buffalo Bills the final game of the season. They went 10-6 and did not make the playoffs. In fact, for the next 5 years, there was no other team that won 10 games and missed the playoffs. It's been a rough time for the Jets. Missed draft picks, really bad personnel decisions. I mean, you can go through the list. Tim Tebow, Trumaine Johnson. It's been brutal. And then you have situations like you hire Adam Gase just out of nowhere. It made no sense at the time. And I understand that, it sounds like Green Bay wants to move on to Jordan Love, so Rodgers may not have a home there. And there's no other team that's really that interested in Rodgers. But that said, I think about recent Jets history. I think about the Adam Gase teams. I think about the Todd Bowles teams. I think about the John Idzik years, with Rex Ryan near the end of his run. Rex, who had the great first 2 seasons and then really was not able to sustain it. I think about those teams, and I wonder, how many of those teams would Aaron Rodgers want to play on? Even though they may be the only option. I mean, do you think Aaron Rodgers really would have come to the Jets in 2020 when they had that awful team? The team that just could not do anything right. The team that, frankly, probably should have gone 0-16. If not for a Rams team that sleepwalked through the first 35 minutes of a game in Los Angeles, and a Browns team that pretty much had no wide receivers because of a COVID outbreak, that Jets team would have gone 0-16. I mean, they lost that ridiculous game when they ran the zero blitz, and Derek Carr hit the long touchdown pass in the last 10 seconds to beat the Jets on a Hail Mary. It's been brutal. And you think about, would Aaron Rodgers really want to associate himself with a franchise that dysfunctional? And you think about where the Jets are heading now. You think about the base of young talent, and the thing with the Jets is almost all the talent on this team is 23 and under. When we're talking about the premium players on this roster, the only guy who's older than 23 is DJ Reed. You got Sauce Gardner, superstar. Garrett Wilson, a guy who very well could break out with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, a guy who had 1,100 yards with Zach Wilson and Mike White and Joe Flacco throwing him the ball last year. You want to talk about Breece Hall, a guy who seemed to be running away with the Rookie of the Year award before he suffered an injury. And then, your complimentary parts, your John Franklin Myerses of the world, your Michael Carter's the seconds of the world, guys like that. And then who knows what Aaron Rodgers can do with Elijah Moore? Maybe Aaron Rodgers will light a fire under Elijah Moore and help him get his act together. There's a lot of young talent on this roster. So you think about this, and you think about what drew Aaron Rodgers to the Jets? Well, obviously Nathaniel Hackett played a role in that. Great job, John, who gave you this long lecture the day Hackett was hired about how it was not going to impact Rodgers. Not my finest moment right there. But you also have to think that this is a young roster with young talent. And again, they're not Super Bowl favorites with Aaron Rodgers. But they're a team that could potentially make noise in the AFC. They're a team that certainly should, you would say, as long as everybody stays healthy or reasonably healthy, this is a team that should end the playoff drought. And Aaron Rodgers can be part of it. And I think it says something good about the Jets, the fact that you can get a guy with this level of reputation, who knows he's in the twilight of his career, that he wants to spend his last days with the New York Jets. Because, listen, it's tough to leave $60 million on the table. That's what Rodgers' salary is for this coming season. I think it's very difficult to leave, but Aaron Rodgers has money. And he's made plenty through his career. He's got opportunities. I mean, the guy was almost hired as the host of Jeopardy! There are other things Aaron Rodgers could do with his life. There are other ways Aaron Rodgers could make money. He wants to come to New York and play with the Jets. And I think about the progress the franchise has made. And it's difficult to see when you lose your last 6 games. It's difficult to see when you have a 12-year playoff drought. It's difficult when you start 5-2, 6-3, 7-4, and then miss the postseason, end with a losing record. But there was legitimate progress this last year. I took away from the season it was a bad. I don't think you can say it's a great season. I think you could even say the season was a failure based on where the Jets were in 2022, but or at least how they began in 2022. But there was legitimate progress, and you have to think that helped attract Aaron Rodgers. And now with Rodgers in hand, maybe the Jets can attract some other key players, some guys who would maybe take them to that next level, push them ahead. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we will close out this episode. And we're going to talk about what still needs to come, because there are still some complications ahead between the Jets and Packers. They need to work out a trade. Who has the upper hand in these negotiations? Well, it's difficult to say, but we'll try and figure it out ahead here on this episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Do you think you can make a move better than trading for Aaron Rodgers? Well, then I've got a game for you. You got to give it a try. It may not be easy as you think to create a dynasty. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every strategic aspect of a football team, and you play through seasons and lead your team to glory while trying to build a historic dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you are responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing all the finances, including player negotiations and salaries, and navigating your franchise through free agency, the draft, injuries, player personnel issues, and all the ups and downs of a season. And all this comes in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. And Locked On Jets listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game store. Again, that's Locked On, all caps, so make sure to check it out today. And to download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Again, that's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, talking about a day where Aaron Rodgers declared that he wants to be a member of the New York Jets. Over the last couple of weeks, the Green Bay Packers have said they will accommodate Rodgers whatever he wants to do, and they've kind of hinted that they did not want to keep him. Their CEO actually addressed the media last week and said, "We'll bring Rodgers back if our plan doesn't work the way we want to." So that kind of spoke volumes right there, that the Packers were ready to move on. It certainly seems like he's on his way to becoming a member of the New York Jets. However, according to multiple reports, the compensation for a trade has not yet been agreed to between the Jets and the Packers. And there are various reports out there. I mean, Adam Schefter of ESPN on Wednesday, a guy who played prominently in Rodgers' interview with Pat McAfee, because Rodgers apparently texted him saying, "Lose my number." And Schefter later confirmed that by posting a screenshot of a text Rodgers sent him. But Schefter reported that the Packers are looking for 2 first-round picks, and the Jets are more interested in the Brett Favre-type conditional pick based on Rodgers' performance, based on the Jets' performance as a team. Nobody knows how far off they are. There have been some other reports out there that maybe the Packers have been acting in bad faith. Maybe the Packers have changed their ask. There have been other reports that maybe the Packers are looking for a day 2 pick. I think, we've heard a million different things about this. So it's difficult to say who's right and who's wrong. I feel like we've seen a contradictory report on every aspect of this whole situation with Rodgers. So who knows what's going to happen? The one thing I think we can say for sure is that there is no deal in place at the moment. So what needs to happen? Well, the Jets and Packers need to reach a deal, and a lot of this is going to come down. There's been lots of speculation about who has the upper hand, who has leverage. And the truth is we don't really know because everybody's got an incentive to get this deal done. The Packers don't want Rodgers around anymore. They want to get rid of this contract. The Jets want Rodgers. Rodgers wants to continue playing, and he wants to continue playing with the Jets. So all parties have a real incentive to get this done. The question is, when we talk about leverage, I think what comes to mind, and nobody really knows the answers to these questions, but if you're going to talk about leverage, who has leverage? Well, it depends on who's most willing to walk away from the deal. Are the Packers actually willing to keep Rodgers around at his current salary? If so, then maybe they have leverage. Are the Jets willing to walk away from Rodgers and go with another quarterback? Maybe go with Zach Wilson again. I don't really know who the other options would be if we're talking about veterans. Maybe they draft somebody. Would they be willing to do that? Then they have leverage. Would Rodgers, to force the issue, be willing to retire? It certainly seems like he was trying to force a trade. He was forcing the Packers to make a move because if you listen to the interview with McAfee, you could tell that he is upset with the way the Packers have acted in this whole situation. If Rodgers is willing to retire, that could hurt the Packers financially. Then he has leverage. So we don't really know the answer to any of this. It's difficult to say because who's most willing to walk away from the trade? Who blinks first? That's the real answer to who has leverage, and we just don't know. So what could a good deal look like for the Jets? Well, here's the thing I look at. The Jets obviously want Rodgers badly, but the Packers really need to dump this contract. And there's nobody else out there who's interested, and that doesn't seem like it's about to change. So I'm looking at this from the Jets standpoint, and I'm saying, why do the Jets need to give up anything of value when the Packers really want him? And of course, the answer is the Jets really want Rodgers at quarterback, but if the Jets can stay disciplined, they should be able to strike a good deal. What's a good deal? Well, not much draft compensation. I would not be excited to see a first-round pick go to Green Bay because you're talking about a 1 to 2 year rental. And I just don't think that that's something the Jets should have to give up for a guy, again, Green Bay doesn't want and nobody else wants, and the Jets want him. So, I would like to see the draft pick compensation be as low as possible. Brett Favre, that Favre compensation, it was a conditional pick based on Favre's performance. It was a conditional pick based on the Jets' performance. That's fair. The Jets win a Super Bowl to give up a first-round pick. Heck, I'd give up a first-round pick for a Super Bowl. But, if he doesn't play so well, then the value of the pick goes down. To me, that seems fair. The other aspect is the contract, and this has been one of the things that's worried me about this deal is Rodgers does have a $60 million salary this year. Now, it's only $15 million against the cap this year, but that other $45 million doesn't go away. And $45 million just is spread out over the next 3 seasons. So if Rodgers retires after the season, or Rodgers retires after 2 seasons, the Jets have a pretty big bill they have to pay. The question is how much of that the Packers are willing to pick up. And I think, again, the Jets are saving the money. The Jets are bailing them out here. And I would love to see the Jets cut that salary in about half. And if they do that, it becomes pretty manageable in my view. And that becomes a great trade for the Jets. Even as somebody who wants to see the Jets view this thing from a long-term perspective, if you can give up a low pick or a conditional pick, and you get the Packers to pick up about half the salary, that's a pretty good deal for the Jets. That's a good short-term stopgap move for the Jets, and it gives them an incredibly high ceiling, heading into the 2023 season. So maybe this is the best of all worlds. We'll see. It's a very exciting time to be a Jets fan. I don't care how you view this trade. You can have concerns. You can view this thing as something that has real risk to it, and I agree with you. But I think you do have to take a moment to appreciate that an all-time quarterback, an all-time great player in National Football League history, has chosen your team that he wants to play for, and that's coming after 12 difficult seasons. So there'll be plenty of time for worry. There'll be plenty of time for skepticism. Let's enjoy this. We don't have much to enjoy. The Jets have given us a lot of grief through the year. So why don't we actually appreciate this fact, and we can worry about all the other factors another day. But that's all for this episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, please a big thumbs up. These things help the channel out and help other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Hope you enjoy your day. We'll be back next time to talk more Jets.